Today we're going to make fresh pasta. We'll start with the dough, obviously. So what we have is a combination of semolina and double O flour here. You can use kind of any ratio, really will work. This is a pretty foolproof recipe. What I have measured out is exactly 300 grams of flour. I did about 50-50 semolina to double O flour, which is a very, very fine flour. And then I have 2 whole eggs and 3 egg yolks, and then added just enough water to this mixture to equal exactly 185 grams, and 2 tablespoons of salt. Traditionally, with making fresh pasta dough, it's made by hand. I'm gonna start by using a food processor. It just quickens the process and is a little less messy. If you don't have a food processor, the idea of doing it by hand from start to finish, and we will switch to using our hands just after we bring the dough together, but you'll pour your flour out into a nice mound. You'll use your fingers to draw a circle and basically make a well in that mound, and then you'll pour your liquid into that well. You can start even with just half of the egg yolk mixture at first, and then using your fingers or a fork, you'll very, very slowly kind of start to work the egg around until you're just barely drawing in the edges of the mound of flour, and eventually it will come together. So really it's much quicker process if we just put it into a food processor. You could also use a standing mixer if that works better for you. I prefer a food processor. Salt. Supposed to bring the dough together, so it's important to just pulse it. I think it's come together enough. Maybe a little bit more. I want it to kind of draw a little bit more from the sides. Maybe I'll even I'm going to turn this mixture out onto my board. Now it's time to start kneading. This is where the work comes. We're going to knead this dough for 10 minutes straight. Then I'm going to add just a touch of double O flour, just a sprinkling. And the process definitely doesn't get easier. That's expected. It's difficult to get this gluten to form by hand, but that means it's a good dough. Finally starting to see a little bit of gluten development. Not tearing as easily. We're getting there. Alright, we are finally at the point where we're ready to let our dough rest. And it is important to let your dough rest for at least 30 minutes. We worked really, really hard to get that gluten developed. So we need to give that gluten some time to relax before we try and roll it out, particularly because we're going to be rolling it out by hand. If you start to attack your dough too early and it just keeps bouncing back, you need to let it rest for longer. So 30 minutes at a minimum. You also have to make sure that it is tightly wrapped because it'll dry out if it's not wrapped. So we're gonna let this guy relax for 30 minutes. We're looking for a nice high-end presentation, and so I'm definitely gonna make sure my paring knife, just trim that pith. Just using my knife, keeping it level to kind of shave that little bit of membrane off, even going further than taking the pith. And it just really makes that bright red color more pronounced. This you could save for something else. I wouldn't say necessarily throw it out. That's edible trim for sure, but for this, you just want the pretty stuff. Next, we're going to work on just some chopped oregano. With oregano, especially with how we're going to be using it because we're putting it into a sauce and in a filling, we want to make sure that we are getting rid of all the stems. And so similar to thyme, you want to look in the direction that the leaves are pointing and pull those leaves off the stem. And then once you get to the end, you can just kind of break that flowery top right off. We're going to chop this really fine. You don't want something that's wet if it's a leaf. But if it's brown, but they're still hinting at green, because it's going into a filling and eventually going to darken when we cook it in our sauce, because there's going to be a little bit in both. That little bit of brown's not going to be the end of the world. It's still flavorful, and that's what we're looking for with this. With our garnish oregano, we're a little bit more intentional with avoiding those brown pieces, because this is getting cooked. It's different. And some more leaves. Get rid of those stems. Typically when I'm saving herbs and I'm holding them out and using them later, I'll put like a damp paper towel over the top of them to keep them fresh. It stops them from wilting. I'm just gonna pile this oregano on top of itself. Chiffon on it first, and then run my knife through it a few more times to get a nice mince, finely chopped. My knife is nice and sharp, so it's not bruising it at all. You always want to make sure you chop herbs with a nice sharp knife. Bruising it really does muddy the flavor, which is really messing up, going against the whole point of adding fresh herbs. Okay. And last, we're going to work on our oregano oil. which is going to have some fried oregano in it. And so again, I was pretty intentional with making sure that these were all really pretty whole leaves. The end, kind of little florets. And I am going to fry this in olive oil. I have my pan over a nice medium heat, so the oil is really hot, and that's key. Like you really want your herbs to sizzle as they go in, and you will want to be careful because you don't want it to get so hot that it smokes and burns your herbs. It's also going to pop up, which is okay. That's what you're looking for. You loosen the heat and just keep moving it around. And you can see as the sizzle starts to die down, those herbs are crisping up. If your herbs aren't fully crisp, you can put it back on the heat, but my oil was at just the right temperature. I can tell that because that sizzle has died down and they're still in that nice bright green. Now I have some crispy oregano leaves in oil, and that's a nice flavored oregano oil. So I'm going to use that as my garnish. It's going to be a beautiful garnish. You can actually just like hold it up, and it can actually hold the fried oregano right in the oil itself, which is lovely, and it stays nice and crispy until you're ready to put it on as a garnish. Maybe not necessarily a traditional Italian garnish, but definitely a more modern take on a pasta. All right, so now we're ready to do our filling for our cheese ravioli. This is a pretty basic filling. You can certainly switch it up with the type of cheese that you use. I went pretty basic with the seasonings on this as well. We're going to start with some whole milk ricotta cheese. Next, I'm going to add some grated Parmigiano Reggiano, some finely chopped parsley, good pinch of that fresh oregano, a couple pinches of this really nice Italian dried oregano. Make sure I'm crumbling it up. I'm going to crack an egg. One whole egg from my favorite farmer. I'm going to microplane some lemon zest. Making sure not to go too far to get pith. Just want to get the zest. I'd also like some of the juice. Just a squeeze. A pinch and a half a pinch of nutmeg. A generous pinch of salt. Even more generous pinch of pepper because I love pepper. Fresh ground. And a nice drizzle of good olive oil. Okay, I'm going to mix it up. The mixture looks wetter than you want it to. You can always add more cheese. I'm probably going to add a little more parm. And it's always good to pop it into the fridge to stiffen it up before you use it. You want it to be nice and stiff when you're putting it into your ravioli, and obviously that egg will help it to really stiffen up once it cooks. Okay. I know there's a raw egg in there, but I'm not scared. There's lemon juice. It's cooked enough. I need to know what it tastes like. We need some more Parmesan. rest of that basil, another pinch of oregano, a little bit more of everything really. Even use a little more of that lemon zest. Yeah, that comes out though, so I'm gonna resist the urge. Putting lemon into the sauce as well. All right. Now we have our ravioli filling. If it looks loose, don't worry. It'll stiffen up as it cools. And set it aside until we're ready to fill our pasta. So our dough has been resting for just over 30 minutes. I've cut it into quarters because I'm going to attack it in pieces, and it's very important to make sure that when you're not dealing with dough, you keep it wrapped or it's going to dry out and it's not going to be something that you can work with. You have to work with it very fast. And that's going to be a little tricky when you're rolling it out by hand, but it's just going to require a certain amount of muscle, just like the rest of the process. You want to get your dough paper thin. When you're doing it by hand, it's a little bit trickier. But it's just a matter of elbow grease and patience. I do like to do this fold the edges in once, just so that I can have nice straight sides. And I'm trying to get it into long strips. Typically, if I was rolling this out using a pasta roller, then at this point I would start feeding it into that pasta machine. We are the pasta machine. halfway there. Okay, so I'm definitely getting there. And I would say the rolling process by hand gets easier as you go, unlike kneading the dough. So just stick with it. Don't get frustrated, stay positive, and just keep rolling, because it does get thinner. It's pretty gratifying, actually. We are the pasta machine. This dough should not be sticking at all at this point, which is beautiful. And as long as you're conscious of working all parts of it, not really neglecting any of the edges, it's not going to dry out too much that it's going to start cracking. Okay, I think we're at the point or the thickness that we want. All right, so we're going to do some big boy ravioli. So I have a cutter. If you don't have a cutter and you want to use something like a cup and a paring knife to cut around, that works just as easy. And as I'm done with these, I'm going to pull them out and I'm going to put them underneath a cloth because I don't want them to dry out. I have to seal them still, put them full of filling and seal them, and those edges are going to get really dried out and crack and not look nice at all. And when we've done all this work, it better look nice when we're done. Don't really have to worry about them sticking to each other. The dough is super forgiving in that respect. And I think you want to be real careful with like how you punch it out, because you don't just want to be doing it carelessly and wasting dough. You could roll this out again, but you've developed so much gluten in rolling it out that it makes it really, really difficult to roll it out by hand. But this is all still useful. You could knead it back together, put it under there, and if you had a pasta machine, it'd be even easier. All right, so let's see if we can't fill these guys. We have enough for 1, 2, 3, 4 ravioli, which means we get to taste one and plate. Okay, so we are ready to put our raviolis together, and we have enough dough rolled out right now for 4 raviolis, which means we get to eat 1 and we get to plate 3. So we're gonna stick with 3 big raviolis. Let's take 2 out for making 1. I'm gonna try and fill these as much as I can without making it so that the filling comes out on the edges, because that's not going to be nice. Take a little bit of egg wash. And some people like to use a fork to crimp the edges. It helps to kind of seal it. If you have a ravioli cutter, that's even better. And you don't have to do the fork. And then as soon as I've done the little seal, I'm going to work around that cheese with my fingers to make sure that there's no air pockets. And then one. I'll do it like this now. Oops. That one might be a little full. We're getting bold. Maybe we're getting messy. We'll see. You can always take it out. What? Freezer, a pot of water, plenty of water in it, going at a nice rolling boil. I'm going to take all 4 of my raviolis and drop them in. Just going to make sure that they're not sticking together. Move them around every once in a while, but in general, they should be just fine. Now we're going to make our pasta sauce. It's a quick sauce. Olive oil, garlic, a little red pepper flake, a little pinch. It's that fresh oregano. I'm gonna go heavy on it. I don't want my heat to get so high that my garlic burns. And I'm going to add just a tiny bit of butter, but I'm going to finish with butter too. And now I'm going to take a little bit of water as well. Just going to start working on a sauce here. Actually, the starch from the ravioli is in that water, which is going to help to thicken the sauce. You want to keep agitating the pan so that as that butter melts, it emulsifies in, rather than just melting away and making have this greasy look. The raviolis are looking like they're cooking nicely. You don't want to put them too early. You don't want to wait too long. Usually, it depends on the size. These, because they're rather large, are going to take anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes. We're almost there. They're nicely sealed. I turn my heat way down. Now I'm going to turn my heat back up, not too high though. I don't want this to lose its nice bright color. Keep it on this. And also if the heat gets too high, it will break. Take just a little bit more of that pasta water. Pretty soon I'm going to start adding these raviolis, and that's when we really start to finish this. Okay, next, slotted spoon. I'm going to start pulling my raviolis out. I'm going to start to turn the heat up. If a little bit of that pasta water gets in, that's good. That's what we want. See how it's starting to bubble now? Don't do the flip too much because you don't want to break your raviolis open. But a little bit. Turn the pasta water up. I'm keeping the heat on here. Now I'm going to be emulsifying some cold butter in and also adding a little bit of Parmesan cheese. And so if I keep this pan moving, as that butter melts, you can see how it's starting to look creamy. You can get a little bit more pasta water. See the nice cream thing that's happening? I haven't added any cream. This is an emulsification between the pasta water, the butter, and the Parmesan cheese. A little squeeze of lemon. Some finely chopped parsley, pinch of salt, good drizzle of olive oil. We're ready to plate. That's beautiful. Okay. Good. Okay. So we're just going to do the 3 raviolis, remember? So maybe pick the 3 prettiest. And then if for some reason your sauce starts to break, you can just add just a couple drops of water and a little heat and it'll bring it right back if it starts to get cold. It's a pretty forgiving sauce as long as you keep that pan working and that temperature under control. I'm going to get a good amount of that bell pepper because it's delicious and beautiful. Add some texture. Still using my slotted spoon at this point for plating. And now I'm going to switch to a regular spoon just so I can get a whole bunch of that delicious looking sauce. It can be swimming in it. Now, finishing touches. That beautiful oregano sizzle that we did, the crispy oregano leaves. Maybe nice to kind of evenly disperse. So you don't necessarily have to go crazy with it. I think I might pick some of these guys up because it's about contrast. Oil. Finish it with a little more Parmesan cheese. And there we go. Some cheese ravioli.